Yo, Saber cult, where y'all at? You know I couldn't wait to get into this one. We got the patient request from Katri. He says, how would Artoria react to Singularity 6 Camelot? Goddess Rhongomyniad made a lot of decisions that the Artoria that we know wouldn't have agreed with. Would the Knights of the Round follow Artoria instead, or would they choose to fight against her? By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your request. Now, there's a lot of different things to get into, man. Honestly, way more than I thought it was going to be when I looked at this initially. So we're gonna have to just section things off. But I first want to get into a little bit on who Goddess Rhongomyniad was for the people that don't know. So in the 6th chapter of Camelot and the Singularity, the original story goes that Bedivere was supposed to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake, Vivian, and that way Artoria could finally pass. She goes on to Avalon, she gets inducted into the throne, at least in the FGO timeline. What happens in Camelot is that Bedivere decides not to do this, and he ends up keeping Excalibur, meaning that Artoria couldn't pass away. And so with Excalibur being such an important weapon forged by the planet and having all these different magical properties, one of the conditions we find is that when he doesn't return Excalibur, she also has another weapon from the Lady of the Lake, Rhongomyniad, and this allows her to transcend her death, turning her into a living ghost where she's supposed to wander the world until the end of time, and she ends up elevating into divine status. By the time we run into her, it had already been 1500 years. The same thing goes for Excalibur. Since Bedivere didn't return it, he also wandered the world for 1500 years in hopes that he could return the weapon to Artoria, because he had realized that he allowed his emotions to get in the way, and he made a very fatal mistake in doing so. He disrupted the natural flow of the way that things were supposed to work, and he felt terrible for it, right? So since Artoria has now elevated to this divine status and she's no longer just a human, she thinks on a capacity that's comparable to other beings that also aren't human, like other gods, or Goetia for instance. But she still follows the same scheme that Artoria Pendragon always wanted. She wanted the best for her people, she wanted the best for her kingdom, so she buried her emotions, acted like a machine, and took on all the criticism and the rebellion that would come with that. So when you think Goddess Rhongomyniad, and Goddess Rongo is what we later find her out to be, originally when she was just wearing her mask, she was the Lion King. But when you consider Goddess Rongo, Rhongomyniad isn't just a weapon, it's not just a thing to wield in combat, but on a conceptual level, it is literally the tower that fastens the layers of the reality that we know to the planet, the reverse and the normal side. And since she became divine, she also knew about Goetia's plans to incinerate humanity. So when you think about her ideals now, instead of her just wanting to save the kingdom, she wanted to find the greatest souls that she possibly could and save them before Goetia was able to finally enact his plan. And you know, in the story, she did this through the holy selection, where out of literal hundreds, thousands of people, she would pick a handful of the purest souls that she thought deserved to continue on, and everybody else got eradicated. It wasn't until we showed up that we were able to disrupt this process. So right off the bat, Goddess Rongo is already doing several things that Artoria wouldn't agree with. Though Artoria, as a king, may have gotten people eliminated by association, she's not the type to go around and just pick people off one by one just because she feels like they were or weren't deserving. Because in her mind, that's not her call. So that's already out of character. That's something that's blown up out of proportion from her original character. It's a lot like the way that OG Artoria feels about Kiritsugu, and how in Fate Zero, it made it very clear that they had the same goals, but there were just lines and there were disciplines involved that she was not willing to cross of her own volition, because again, she has those standards while Kiritsugu didn't. But what we we also come to find is by the end of the war, when Kirisugu can finally go through with his wish, that he also has a threshold of standards that Angra wanted to implement that even he couldn't agree with. And this is a person that had also devoted themselves to being a machine and also devoted themselves to saving as many as he possibly could by taking the greater portion over the smaller. Another thing that Goddess Rongo did the moment that she got there is she summoned as many knights of the round as she possibly could, and she gave them a choice. You could either side with me or you could go your separate way. But just know, if you do that, you're the enemy, and you have until sunset to make the choice. The people that sided with her, majority of them, you see them in Camelot, her starting 5 and such. She gave them gifts that further increased their power in exchange for something in return. And the people that disagreed, the people that couldn't get down with her, they had to fight the other knights that stood with her. So before she did anything, it was a slaughter between her own knights, and the ones that stood with her are the ones that lived to tell the tale. This is also something that Artoria wouldn't do if she had the choice. Sure, she had knights under her in her life that went against fellow knights, like Gawain fighting against Lancelot, for instance, or her going against Mordred, but this was also due to the crumble of Camelot. This wasn't something that she initiated, it was more so of her having her back against the wall. And then also, if you consider the way that she treated her knights, people like Gawain and Mordred especially, Goddess Rongo has no problem getting rid of you, in whatever case that may be. When she knocked Gawain outside of Camelot in the chapter, the only reason she allowed him to stay is because he had the fortitude to survive it. So she said, okay, I'll let you have that. The only reason. Same thing with Mordred, and how she would only allow her to take part of the inside of Camelot during the day. And she had no remorse about this. She didn't have any regrets in the way that she thought, even all the way up until when Bedivere finally returned Excalibur to her and she finally could disappear. She still had no regrets on what she thought was right, because again, she's ascended. She's not thinking like a human. And this is largely different from Artoria, because she's not going against her own people this way unless she absolutely has to. And all in all, it brings up the greater point of the separation between OG Artoria and Goddess Rongo, is that humanity divinity separation, right? In the Goetia video, I talked about why his plan was so efficient and how he manipulated Solomon's background in order to save humanity and give people what they deserve from his perspective. All of that stemmed from Goetia himself not being specifically human. It's also a common trope across the Lost Belts, and I'm seeing a lot of people that are aware of this. That divide makes all the difference. You know, I hear about whether or not the Lion King was evil or not. I'm not looking at the Lion King as somebody that's evil when she stands above humanity. The same way I'm not looking at Gil for being evil for what he wanted to do in Fate Stay Night, because like I said, and like he said, if I don't do it, you guys are gonna do it anyway. For a human, it's completely different, because everybody knows that humans have standards and laws that they normally abide by in society. They don't see things the same way, they're able to gauge emotion, and most of all, they're in the mix themselves, so they know better than anybody. So if Goddess Rongo were to do the exact same thing and she were OG Artoria, then I'm looking at her sideways, because we already know she knows better. It's not the same thing. You know, I often hear a lot of people completely gloss over the context of works like The Garden of Avalon that went into greater detail about the myth of King Arthur for Artoria. And one thing that they love to bring up is how OG Artoria, in order to keep the kingdom up, to keep their people alive, she would raid her own villages for resources and do things that may put her own people in harm's way to keep the infrastructure going. And they always go as far to say that she's a bad king for that. And I completely disagree with this. You're just lucky that it's never happened to you. If you think that if we were in war and our side needed resources, that they wouldn't break into your house to get some, you are a fool. Straight up, you're a fool. You're delusional. Unless you're gonna go out there and fight. If they're wrong, you can go out there and fight and figure it out. Otherwise, I don't see what your complaint is. What it really shows me is the complete lack of awareness of being not just an overseer of anything, but the ruler of a kingdom in general. It makes me think about the title of being a president or whatever authority there is in a country, and how they always run that person's name into the dirt. No matter who it is, no matter what they do, it's never good enough. It shows me how entitled people are, and it also shows that same lack of compassion to the ruler that they want to virtue signal to the people so badly, like they've ever had to deal with anything on that level whatsoever. These guys can barely run a cash register, let alone know anything about running a country, but they will be the first to jump out the window and explain how what this ruler is doing wrong or right. You know, I think about the laws of the US, and I can only speak about being from America. From my perspective, nobody owes you anything. I don't care where you come from. If you're familiar with martial law, these people could kick the door down at any time that they want, and they would not be wrong for it because it's already pre-established. I don't know where this idea came from that it is this black and white extreme thing to be a ruler. Of course, some rulers aren't going to do everything perfect, but some rulers also have different situations when they come into office. They have a lot less going on. They have a lot less reliable people, a lot less reliable resources, circumstances. You might champion somebody for being a good ruler when all they did was take the credit for somebody that just passed away and they ended up taking their spot. That happens quite often. And on the flip side, you can have somebody trying their best to be the ruler, and the person before them has left one of the worst possible situations you could think of, and yet they're the ones that's supposed to take the blame for it. That's just what being a ruler is. But I'd be disingenuous to sit here and act like it's easy to say that Artoria is a bad king because she pillaged from her own villages so everybody could survive. So let me get this straight with this line of thinking. Let's say that she didn't pillage from the villages. Would she be a better king if she just let everybody die? Like, it's crazy the arguments that I see. Are you guys really thinking this through? You can't be. When Goddess Rhongo released her blast at the village and was prepared to destroy all of them, completely out of character from OG Artoria, but I'm not looking at it in a bad way. And here's somebody with the rebuttal to this. You think raising a village full of innocent settlers who couldn't even make a dent in Camelot's wall is justified? And here's the thing about it. Since Goddess Rhongo has this mentality of OG Artoria and is blown out of proportion, but it also lacks the humanity, it makes complete sense. From a divine standpoint, she has already deemed those people unworthy. And to add context, because people love to leave that out, these innocent settlers, from her perspective, have now joined hands with the enemy. That's how they were able to survive in the first place. In war, and just for most people in general, a friend of the enemy is an enemy also. So these so-called innocent settlers, Goddess Rhongo is looking at them no different from the person that could up and stab her in the back like the people did to OG Artoria during the rebellion of Camelot. It's literally no difference. Bro, you gotta understand, an enemy is about 2 blinks away, and you're making it real downplayed. For example, when Judas betrayed Jesus, the difference between Judas being an enemy was a matter of 2 minutes. So the idea of you not taking that into consideration again lets me know that you're not really paying attention altogether. It's not about that. You keep trying to make it about good or bad when the entire time the whole point is that she's been largely removed from that element. And you notice, because I know people love to ignore things like this, when Bedivere finally gave Excalibur back and her humanity started to return to her, she could have killed all of us. She had the choice to wipe us all out. We didn't defeat her. She gave up. I say it all the time. And you know what she did now that she had her humanity back? She let us go. How's that for being evil? When Agravain wanted her to punish him, she let it go. Bedivere, she let it go. And when it went back to normal, she went back to the same old Artoria. Even the gifts that she gave to her knights, beyond them just being this seal, this pact where they couldn't go against her, they had a lot of nuance from a narrative perspective. Tristan's gift, for example, made him cold-hearted, which emphasizes on that machine-like character that Artoria had to be. Mordred had a gift that, in order to give her best, she continued to deteriorate her soul, the same way Artoria had to while she was ruling. Agravain had a gift of sacrifice, the same way that she had to do for her people. It's a lot like Rhongomyniad, where you're taking on the sins so everybody else can thrive, just to name a few. So how would OG Artoria feel about the Lion King? Again, she would largely disagree with pretty much everything that she did, but in no way was the Lion King wrong overall, is what I'm saying. Artoria never would have took it that far because she was human, but the Lion King just goes to show how far she would have took it if she wasn't. And honestly, considering the way that Camelot went down, if you know the whole thing and not just have selective memory about different parts of it, you can't blame them.